Welcome back. You are still watching Morning Live. As we get into your sport news in this hour, now women are making inroads in the world of sports and are occupying important spaces in what predominantly used to be male-dominated areas. Now, to talk to us about this, we've roped in a former professional golfer in Bertine Faber, who is now a strategist at MSC Sports. Bertine, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Sports and Morning Live.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's start at the beginning of your story, because initially amateur #1 ranked golfer in South Africa. You then move on into 3 years on the LPGA Tour, and then Sunshine Ladies Tour victories as well 3 times. Let's talk about the transition from you, and what would you say influenced the transition from being a professional golfer to where you are now focusing on sponsorship?
I mean, just mentioning that it takes me back a few years, which I was obviously very fortunate to have had a successful time in professional golf. Golf has afforded me a lot in my life. It opened up a lot of opportunities for me, and it's sort of been a bit of a full circle journey to be able to sit here and be on the different side of it, be on the business side of it, and to be able to make an impact from that perspective. I think if you asked me, 5 years ago when I retired, if I would be working within sports in this particular role, I didn't even know it existed at that point, but had some opportunities come my way that I've been very fortunate to have, and ended up in this role now at MSC Sports for the last 4 years. And yeah, it's been very eye-opening, and very, very blessed to be in this position to be able to give back to not just golf but to women's sport that has afforded me so much in my life.
And what we've seen, I think, in recent years is that we are seeing more women and more females having dominant positions in areas where predominantly it was just males. Would you say that is a result of possibly the mindset of people changing in terms of having women not just for the sake of making up numbers, but knowing that women actually are capable?
Most definitely. I think there's been a lot of male figures within the business that have done exceptionally well for female sports, and that have put a lot of effort into it. But I do think that having women, it gives that unique perspective. I also think it makes it relatable. I think it gives that sort of essence of there's a woman fighting for women's sport. I think it just makes it a bit more relatable. It adds authenticity. So I think it's been very good to see. I think when you look at America specifically, though, there's a lot of female voices that stand up for equality in sport, and they've had tremendous growth. I think just recently now watching where women's basketball is going, where women's soccer has gone, and yeah, hoping from our perspective, from a South African perspective, that we can follow in sort of those footsteps.
How big would you say the gap is from your point of view? Because I mean, you've been in South Africa, you've played in South Africa, you've studied abroad in the US, you've played professionally that side as well. How far behind would you say we are, if at all, as South Africa?
Look, unfortunately, we are still behind, but I think we've made massive inroads in the last 3, 4, 5 years. You look at the success of the women's Proteas, being able to be the first national cricket team to make it into a World Cup final, hosting the Netball World Cup last year, all-female broadcast team, all-female team. I mean, I think that in itself was a very significant achievement. You look at individual female stars that we've had, golfers like Ashley Buhai winning a major a couple of years ago, Olympics coming up again. I'm sure we've got a few medal hopefuls that are in the running there. I think Tatiana would definitely want to repeat what she did in Tokyo. So there's a lot of opportunity. I think it's just a matter of getting that same level of buy-in from brands to see that and to support. Because I think when we see the support come, we see success happen. And I think if we can get into that same mindset, get to the point where it is in countries like the US, where from a viewership perspective it's basically equal, in some instances the women's game being more popular. Like I mentioned, now with women's basketball, you look at college basketball, March Madness is just coming to an end now. The women's teams are pulling higher viewership than the men's teams, which is unheard of. So I think if we can get to that point where it's seen as South African sports fans supporting a national team and not a women's versus a men's team, and we can get those viewership numbers up, get the fans into into the stadiums. I think that's when we get that right, I think we'll be able to catch up.
And my next question is going to be a strange one, because I want to know from you, how do we though get it right? Because how do we then get equity in sport for women? Because you see a Claire Williams who's been a team principal in Formula One, but when you look at the other roles within Formula One, you don't see many female engineers. We bring it back home to South Africa. And in other countries as well, you don't see a woman coaching a men's football team, but you see it the other way around. So how do we begin to start and change that?
I think it requires a lot of perseverance. I think it's just a matter of, keep on knocking on the door, whether it is from a coaching perspective, from a player perspective, from a sponsorship perspective. It doesn't matter where you try and make those inroads. I think it's having that persistence to keep on, to keep on going, keep on trying. And I think eventually it's, building that little bit of momentum one step at a time, and eventually, the hope is that it'll turn into a snowball effect where we just gather all that speed. And I think that's what I've seen, happen in the US. You've seen that happen in Europe quite a bit, especially around women's soccer. I think for the Barcelona women's team, I think it was Women's Champions League final, semi-final. They actually beat the men's records from stadium attendance perspective. So I think, again, it's just staying at it, staying persistent, and whenever we take a couple steps forward, make sure that we don't take 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. I think it's just keeping at it.
And from your point of view in terms of sponsorship, what would you say your view is in terms of women empowerment in that regard?
I think from a sponsorship perspective, I'm gonna argue for or fight for why brands should invest in women's sponsorship. I think there's still a massive opportunity within the South African market. I think we've seen brands that have invested in an authentic way that have achieved a tremendous success. You look at Sasol around Banyana. They've been there for the last 5, 6, 7 years. It's not just been, they're doing well now, let's try and put our brand behind it. They've been there for a consistent period of time. They've supported them through both the ups and the downs, and now they are reaping the rewards because they can tell that story of how they've been there all along. You look at Momentum and the women's Proteas, similarly Investec within the women's golf space. They've been a consistent contributor, and they've been part of the growth of the game. And I think you see that level of authenticity from those sponsors, and that would be my sort of encouragement, or my ask from sponsors is, when you are getting involved, get involved for the right reasons. Don't just all of a sudden, now that you've seen an athlete or a team become successful, now you want to sort of jump on the bandwagon. I think it needs to be aligned with your values as a brand, and if you are then willing to invest, there is tremendous opportunity to differentiate yourself from sort of other sponsorships. Not to bash on the Springboks, but I mean, they've got a big portfolio of sponsors, so to stand out from the crowd there is difficult, unless you are on the front of the jersey, or one of the naming rights partners to one of the biggest bigger teams in the country. It's difficult to differentiate yourselves, whereas with the women's game there's a lot of opportunity to really go at it from a different way.
And we do hope that the status quo will certainly change. And with you there fighting for women, as a former sportswoman, exactly what the challenges are, and you're now trying to make a difference for those that have come after you. Thank you so much for your time this morning,
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bertine Faber just talking about the strides that women are making in sports, particularly from a sponsorship point of view. And that's the note in which we'll wrap up your sport news.